Welcome into the kickoff of our Red Pill sessions right here on SkiNet on Dash Radio Now. On my TV show, I've always done these segments I love called The Red Pill, where we address real issues facing ourselves, our community, and everybody else. And for today, I'm joined by Dr. Tyler Norris. Tyler, welcome in.
Thank you, Ski. Great to be with you.
Yes. Now, you are here on behalf of Providence St. Joseph Health, and we're going to talk about an issue that has plagued kind of I would say the entertainment world, but I think that would be even understating it. I think this is something that has affected every single person out there listening, and that is mental health. And let's talk about what the role of Providence St. Joseph is and what they have been kind of doing, and then we'll jump into your role with the WellBeing Trust.
Sure. Well, first of all, Providence St. Joseph Health is one of the nation's leading healthcare systems. It's a combination that a year and a half ago, Providence Health Services and St. Joseph of Orange came together to form one of the largest health systems in the country. And part of the question is, now we're bigger, so what? What should we be doing? And the commitment was made to address mental health and well-being and substance use as a primary focal point for the new health system. And so it's been making major commitments to clinical transformation and addressing community and the issues that are undercutting our well-being.
Yeah, it's a great thing. And you've become chief executive of the WellBeing Trust.
Yes.
And how would you break down the WellBeing Trust?
Sure. So when Providence St. Joseph came together and made a commitment to lean into mental health, the health system made a $100 million commitment to build a new national foundation, which is now called WellBeing Trust. And it's not only a child of the health system, but it's being built as a platform for other philanthropies and other health systems to join. So our mission is to advance the mental, social, and spiritual health of the country. So addressing mental health issues, substance use issues, and really helping encourage human potentiation, human flourishing is at the heart of our new foundation.
It's an incredible issue that literally faces, as we addressed, every single person in this country. I don't think there's anybody, and that doesn't mean that they have to be even dealing with it necessarily themselves, but there's family members, and there's so many different verticals of this. I mean, you talk about chemical dependency, alcohol dependency, depression. We're going to talk about sports and athletes on this program too, and how, there's one specific athlete, incredible careers, who injuries derailed him and never had, necessarily mental health issues in his eyes before, but kind of came and jumped on that. Now, why do you think that, one thing I want to say is that I think we're at the place now where it has finally become acceptable to talk about it. I mean, we've seen even people like the homie Logic, who has created just an incredible record that has, and a lot of these things have typically in the past, if people have ever addressed it, it's almost been secondary or a feel good or almost a throwaway, but a record that's hit top 10 on the charts that's just blown up. And I think now with, the influence of social media, you're seeing people comfortable to talk about these things now. What's been your experience in terms of how the public is now kind of addressing these issues? Is it still taboo, cliche? Is it coming out more? Of course, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I'd love to get your perspective.
Well, first of all, 1 in 5 Americans suffers from some mental health and substance use issue all the time, which means that every one of our families, if you think about our close friends, one of us is suffering, and 1 of 4 of us will in our lifetime. So that means all of us. Yeah. So it's a real reality for all of us, for our families and our closest friends. I think the what's beginning to happen, and we see it with our musicians and athletes and other public figures beginning to come out, is a statement that having a mental health or substance use issue is not a character flaw.
Yes.
It's not a moral failure. There's nothing sort of fundamentally the matter with you and the identity as a human being for struggling with an issue like this. And so for many of these individuals who have public personas to start to come out and talk about what's going on is really making it safer for all of us to begin to talk about these issues. That's changing a conversation. Yeah. And it's not only sort of important that our influencers are doing that, but for all of us to be able to start to say, because if you can't name the issue you're facing, you can't do much about it.
Exactly. Now, I think we're going to be playing some records and some songs on this program from some artists. So I think it's great if we kick it off actually with Logic, 1-800-273-8255. I'm sure you've heard this record. What was your thoughts when you kind of found out about this song? Like, were you like, wait, what is this? Just your reaction as being somebody in the scene.
Right. Well, one of my first questions was, is this an issue that Logic has himself? And is this real, or is it about a friend? And it began to sort of make it really personal. And then I started thinking about my own friends, my own families, and in fact, an uncle who took his life early in his life. So that meant something very personal to me, but I was thrilled that Logic had the courage to.
Yes. And the interesting thing about this is that when you looked at the stats of the call volumes and the logs that has happened, like, he has saved lives with this record. So thank you to Logic for doing this. We're going to talk much more about mental health next. This is Dash Radio. I'm DJ Ski. It's Logic right here. We are back here on Dash Radio and Ski TV with Dr. Tyler Norris, the chief executive of the WellBeing Trust, and we are talking about mental health. We were just playing Logic right there with an incredible record about that. But you guys have actually been working on some series with different artists, and it's interesting some of the people that you've got involved. Notably, I know Freddie Gibbs is doing a content piece with you guys, which is, and he went through a different type of issue. He went through something where he was falsely accused of a crime, and he thought his life was over. In situations like that, I mean, there's so many different layers to this. Again, when we're talking mental health, it could be somebody that's perfectly, and somebody, we'll talk about a couple of different issues, but this isn't something that he necessarily was always facing. It came upon overnight. And people, I don't think, realize that is, that this is also qualifies as mental health issues.
Yeah.
And something that happens all the time, right?
So I think when a lot of us think about mental health, we think about serious and persistent mental illness. It's essentially almost disabling to the person of ability to function. But most of us at one time or another feel some anxiety, feel a sense of depression, or have depressive thoughts. Many of us even think about taking our lives. Fortunately, most of us don't go that far. But this is not just, well, there's a 5, 6, 7% of the population. 30 to 40% of us feel alone at different times. 30, 40% of us have a sense of anxiety throughout the course of our day. So in a way, this isn't just about removing stigma. It's about saying, if I had a problem with my knee or my foot, or I twisted it, I'd tell you about it and we go, hey, here's how I'm recovering.
Exactly.
That's what's starting to happen with these artists who are sort of coming out and saying, this is real for me, and here's how I'm healing it, and it's pervasive. And so I think part of what's going on is that we're having we're beginning a national conversation that says our anxiety, our depression, our substance use, our difficult thoughts are actually something that needs to be named, that you're not alone, that there's ways to get help, and that we can actually not only get help, but we can show up for each other, and we need to.
That's an interesting point. So the way that you just put, and I want to be clear and understand this. So the same way I hurt my back earlier this week. It's not a persistent problem necessarily. I was doing too much, trying to lift too much weights or something. You need to go to the chiropractor now and get that fixed. Right. Is it the same with mental health, where there could be something that's like, if I go through an issue like this, I should go in and get treatment? Is that what you're saying?
Well, you may need treatment, or it may just be a conversation. And we can think about all of that.
And there's different layers.
But just like your back, how bad is it? You need a chiropractic session, you need to stretch, you need to, what is that?
Exactly.
Or is it something that's chronic and beginning to become a problem, and you're really concerned about it, at which point, of course, you'd seek out a healthcare provider and you'd go get the care that you need. But at a less acute level, it may just be a need for a confidant. I mean, recent data looked at over 40% of Americans saying they don't have a confidant, somebody to actually speak to. So we're sort of lonely around those type of topics. So at one level, it could be just to have a conversation of significance with a loved one or a friend or a buddy that you're real with. But it could be that the issue becomes a little more chronic, like a chronic back pain or diabetes or hypertension, that it's nothing to be ashamed of. You go to the doctor, you get the help you need, you get the medication you need, and we treat it as that's part of being a healthy person, as we get the care we need and we support each other.
That's a great point. And for listeners out there who might be facing these issues or questioning themselves now, and hopefully, opening up a whole new line of thought, because I know it is for me, even just having this conversation with you. How do you tell at what point do you need to get help? What's the baseline for that versus, I can just, sleep it off and I'll be okay tomorrow versus or not? Or if you're by thinking about that, does that mean probably?
Well, my sense is that most people actually have a pretty darn good sense of how well they're doing. In fact, there's a little test called SF1, which is how's your health? Like, and it turns out that that we are quite accurate about how our health is, our sense of our own well-being. So my sense is and there's tests like the PHQ-9 that ask a series of questions that are a depression scale. So you could go to your physician and actually take that test and have a sense about how serious an issue would be. But my sense for someone who's and is not trying to dispense medical advice, you could talk to your provider directly about that. But that if you start to feel like this is getting chronic, I'm feeling this way 2-3 times a week. I'm feeling this way most weeks now. It's inhibiting my ability to care for my loved ones, my ability to do a good job at work or school, that it's probably worth going and talking to a clinician and having a conversation. There's no downside. If anything, you're going to get pointed in the way of, you could either be calm, that it's okay, or maybe there's some need for help.
Very true. And an interesting thing, we talked about Freddie Gibbs. We're going to get to one of his records in a second. But one thing that he pointed out, I believe, in the content that he did with you guys is that in his culture, this isn't something that he felt, comfortable talking about. And if you look at Freddie's background, he's a gangster rapper from the Midwest, and he's like looking hip hop, and even in the culture that I grew up in, this is kind of taboo. Like, it's not cool to talk about mental health. And shouts to him for addressing that and coming out and putting that at the forefront, because I think it is a very important conversation to be had. Now, do you see that happening in the space too? Is it difficult for people because of where they feel they come from? Like, it's not easy to talk about, I guess, for anybody too.
For anybody. I mean, I know it in the work culture, in the corporate culture, in the healthcare sector where I work, talking about those kind of issues can be really intimidating.
Yeah.
Would that limit my potential at work? Would I get hired or rehired? That sort of thing. So that's true. Culturally, maybe that means I'm not as strong of a man. Maybe that means I may not attract the partner that I want if I have those kinds of issues. It's real. But when we have 22 veterans, women and men who fought in battles, who've demonstrated their courage, taking their life every day because of it. This isn't about being tough or hardcore or a gangster or just like a whole man or woman. This is something that is really a sign of courage to begin to talk about. And so, guys like Freddie, who are sort of pioneers, are making it possible for all of us to feel more comfortable to talk about it and to discover that we're not alone.
There it is. Couldn't said it any better. This is the Red Pill Sessions. We'll be right back with much more. And right now, I'm so happy because not only are we talking about real things, but we get to play a record off a project that me and Freddie did that kind of put him in the scene. Now, this is probably my favorite mixtape I've ever done. Let's play something off of Midwest Gangsta Box Frame Cadillac Music. It's Freddie Gibbs. I'm DJ Ski. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the inaugural Red Pill Sessions. I'm DJ Ski, joined by Dr. Tyler Norris from Providence St. Joseph Health, and we are talking about mental health, music, how it affects all of us, and I guess everybody in culture outside of, musicians. We had a conversation earlier about, even Logic's record. We just had Freddie Gibbs right there. But I want to talk about sports. I've been around a lot of athletes. I DJ all of the Vikings games, so Skull to all my Minnesota people. But an interesting thing happens. People see these guys on top of the world, see them making incredible money that we could, a lot of people would only dream of, and thinking everything is good. But money does not create, we always hear it, but it's true. Money truly does not create happiness. And there's situations, for example, I know you guys have worked with Greg Oden. So for people who may not be familiar, Greg Oden, one of the highest touted prospects in basketball, #1 draft pick, career pretty much derailed by injuries. And, there's only, look, he did everything that he can. He came into the league with all these high expectations, and his body just didn't hold up on him. And, I know in speaking from what I've heard from you guys, he faced some issues after that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, for somebody who's so incredibly talented, top of the game, all of a sudden can't play. Now who am I?
Yeah, what do you do after that? And he's young. He's in his 20s. Like, we're talking about a guy,
and already saying
injuries.
maybe the best part of my life is over. What is there to look forward to? And what was so beautiful about it is he leaned back into his family and into his child and sort of rediscovered a deeper sense of identity that wasn't oriented only to who he was as an athlete. And so I think for anyone who loses a job, loses a lover, has a family member, something that really throws them, it's like, now how do I navigate with a new world where the picture I'd painted around myself, the identity of who I thought I was or was going to be is thrown. And his courage is exactly, I think, what all of us are asked to do in those times. And also when and how we need to show up for each other when somebody we care for is going through their own sense of loss.
Can only imagine. And another athlete that you guys have worked with is Abby Wambach, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
There's a few things that I know that she's faced. I mean, publicly, things that like drunk driving charges, which are obviously not a good thing, but look, it's real issues that people face, and it can't be easy, especially being under the spotlight for that, as well as her coming out. Like there's multiple issues, and all those things I'm sure compound and don't make life always easy, even though we see her on the covers of Sports Illustrated and, running the U.S. Sorry.
And I think it's really important with that. A lot of what we're seeing, drunk driving is a symptom, a symptom of something deeper. Our reaching for alcohol, reaching for substances, overworking, whatever it is that we reach to outside of ourselves to sort of fix the gap. Every one of us knows what we reach to when we get sad or we get thrown off. We all have our little addictive patterns. Some of them, like work, might sound a little more socially beneficial, but the eating disorders and the way in which that we all know what it is that we do. And I think part of what Abby was looking at is where does she find her own strength now as her symptom was so in her face that
it's incredible. Now, another athlete you guys have worked very closely with recently is Brandon Marshall, and you guys have a partnership with him, correct?
Absolutely. We're so moved by what Project 375 is really about, and I think the sort of underlying model, and he sort of really built this beautifully in the East Coast, and we're looking forward to expanding work with him out west, is how do we teach parents and teachers and counselors who are working with young people to, first of all, recognize signs of anxiety, depression, mental health issues, substance use, to first just be able to recognize it and be able to, secondly, then open a conversation, make it safe to really talk, and then to train young people and refer so that they can get the support they need, which could be peer help, sort of co-production of help like we do for friends, or refer to a provider. And so Brandon's work, I think, has been so important because it creates room in that middle space between, hey, I'm hurting, I'm struggling with something, and over here's all these docs, and most of us, we don't. 67% of Americans, 2/3 are not getting the mental health care we need. And what Brandon's doing is making sure that there's a bridge between people who are needing help getting the help they need at whatever level or nature is important. And so we're really excited about that partnership.
That's a great
So many people respond to him in a beautiful way.
It's so great. And so many people coming out. And I think, we're really at this tipping point where, I feel like, people are now okay to talk about this and to address it. And hopefully even conversations like what we're having and bringing in real scenarios from huge celebrities and stars and athletes and people that I look up to, that our listeners look up to, is just, I think opening that conversation is is one of the first steps that we can do for that. Now, getting back to music, we're going to play another record. And it's interesting because we're going to take it back with an old school hip hop song. This comes from Willie D as part of the Ghetto Boys. And there's a record, their biggest record is called Mind Playing Tricks on Me, which everybody thought fun record. But if you listen to some of his lyrics, and I guess the whole Ghetto Boys as a whole, there's some very dark things in there that they talk about, specifically with mental health. I mean, we're talking about records with even people putting guns to their heads and everybody thinks it's done in his lyrics and in jest. But you guys have done some stuff with Willie, and this was real, and I've heard, and from his perspective, it was, it all kind of stemmed from, growing up in an abusive home with, I believe, his mother. And it kind of drove him down this line. It was interesting for him, I'm sure, because everybody kind of took that, nobody really looked between the layers of that record. And, in dealing with that, how do you start talking and I guess beginning these conversations if you're somebody like Willie?
Well, I think one of the things is just to recognize that just because things happen to us as a young person, and he talks about his mom and sort of what he felt and didn't feel in that experience, doesn't mean that there's something fundamental the matter with you. And so we've been learning a lot in the science of adverse child experience, or ACEs, that are experiences. It could be a family member in incarceration, substance use, abuse, physical, emotional, or otherwise in the household, that creates a bit of a score. And we see a direct correlation between those adverse child experiences and school outcomes, work outcomes, keeping partnerships together. And so with the ability to sort of talk about these issues, we can actually help people to get the support they need to actually be able to have a highly flourishing life. But I think one of the things we're also learning is that the kind of experiences that Willie and others are saying, they're kind of difficult, adverse child experiences, aren't just personal. They also occur at a community level. So we talk now about a pair of ACEs, not only adverse child experience, but adverse community experience, where living in a community with pervasive toxic stress, just getting to school, just trying to sort of get one's life moving forward is stressful in itself. And all of that is undercutting human potentiation and really being who we are and what we're capable of being. And so this kind of opening the conversation, in a way, we're unlocking who the human being can really be. So it's not just, substance use, mental health issues, how are we going to treat it? It's really about how do we activate our spirit, mind, body, and be who we can be, and be proud of that, and be on the journey and show that as a sign of strength.
Incredible insight from Dr. Tyler Norris. We're going to get into the music from Willie D and the Ghetto Boys right now. I think it's a fitting song, a great record too. My mind's playing tricks on me. We'll be right back with much more Red Pill Sessions. I'm DJ Ski. Welcome back to the Red Pill Sessions. I'm your host, DJ Ski, and through this show, and this is the inaugural episode, we're going to be talking about things that are affecting our culture today, courtesy of Providence St. Joseph Health. We have Dr. Tyler Norris, who's also the chief executive of the WellBeing Trust. We're playing music and talking about real-life issues from artists, celebrities, and people out there. So thank you all for listening, and spread the words that you hear from this. Don't be afraid to have a conversation with somebody else. That would be the one piece of advice that I have that we want you to walk away with from this show, if nothing else. It's about starting that conversation, and somebody that you guys are working with that's an incredibly talented artist. One of my favorite MCs out there is Snow the Product, who, it's interesting because as a Latina females in high school, there's a statistic, I believe, they're twice as likely to commit suicide at that point in their life. And it's, again, something that might be taboo in culture to talk about. But she's even mentioned that, and she's such a talented rapper, but if she wasn't doing music, I think she said she would have been a mental health therapist, which is kind of crazy. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, well, one, it's actually a reminder, first of all, of the silent suffering that so many have, and that the choice to take one's life is all too often where that ends. And the thing I think that she's really pointing to is that the lived experience of anxiety, depression, or substance use, or whatever it might be, what someone is actually experiencing, is a way of sort of learning and facing an issue that is really powerful when it means showing up for another person. So when someone else is struggling with that, the people with their own lived experiences that have faced this stuff and come through is exactly who we need. It's one of the reasons that WellBeing Trust is helping forge a national network of teen peer listeners and helplines to be able to sort of, as we open more and more conversations about mental health and wellness, to actually create a sort of a supply of young people who are ready to show up with each other. So that lived experience that you may be struggling with is exactly the skill set, the understanding that somebody else may need. So what you think may be, your problem is probably the gift that the person sitting next to you actually needs for you to come forward with your story and listen to them.
And I think that's a key thing is listening. And somebody else that you guys have worked with, it's a good friend of ours that has a show up here on Dash Radio on her own station, is Tion from TLC. And recently she came across a tragic issue with her cousin who is mentally disabled. And he was shot by a police officer, and she's, been outspoken about the issues surrounding that. And I don't, regardless of the issue, which we don't even have to get into, it's a whole other conversation. When something like that happens, when you lose a family member, and this is something that now is obviously affecting her as it should, and anybody else in that, what are the resources? How do you move on with your life for people out there that might have? I mean, it's going to happen to everybody. We're all going to lose somebody close to us, and for those that are currently experiencing or that haven't, what should be those steps that we take, and especially in a circumstance like this, secondarily, when it's somebody that how do you even help your own family and your own friends that you see with it?
And then it's such a big issue because it's personal, and then it's a social justice issue at the same time.
Yeah, there's so many layers to this when you pull it back. But if you look on the surface, just from a high level, for people dealing, I think, with just any type of trauma, or that when they're inevitably going to face that, what do you recommend kind of doing? How do you wake out? It's tough to even get out of bed in the morning sometimes.
Right. Well, the first is to recognize that in such a situation, grief is normal, and to feel sadness that extends over time is a normal human experience. And in fact, one of the things that we found is people who don't grieve long enough, actually it shows up later. It just goes underwater, it goes into the bottom part of the iceberg. So it's important to be able to grieve and feel and find a place to talk about it. Some folks might do that with a confidant or a family member, or might seek group dialogue sessions, or find a community organization that's providing something. Others may need that it was so unsettling, so threw them off, parents, a spouse or a partner, where something more may be needed, and clinical practice, you may need to reach to the doc to be able to do that. But I think what we're all recognizing is these are human issues. There's nothing that needs to be outside of culture. That's something we need to be able to bring in and make a normal, healthy conversation to allow the grief to be there. And then to be asking the question, and what then can I do? Can I be a listener for another person? Is there an issue in my neighborhood I want to step up to, or in my community or my place of work? Or in the case of law enforcement, how do we continue to support law enforcement's ability to get better at facing mental health issues through mental health first aid, so that the first response isn't,
Yeah. And these are issues that face everybody. Again, we're talking entertainers and things, but we're doing this to relate, to show that, nobody is immune to this. Absolutely. This is an issue that faces, as we said at the beginning of the show, every single person, definitely listening and across the globe. So I think it's only right now that we play some TLC. Let's take it back with Unpretty, a song about kind of feeling not up to par. Another great mental health institute. I mean, we're talking about basically bullying, and something with cyberbullying coming on, which is a real issue, and is something that's prevalent now, that has come up, especially in the age of social media, that didn't exist before. And I know a lot of people out there might be facing that. What resources do you want to give, and what advice would you give people out there that might feel like, or that have ever been bullied from somebody on the internet?
Well, one thing, and what we're doing with #BeWell, is really kind of beginning a conversation, which in social media is people starting to share their experiences, talking about how they're healing. So the first piece is just open a conversation about it. And second is to both find one's voice, to speak up, and be a listener. Right? What would it mean for us to look somebody in the eye who's struggling and just listen and acknowledge and soak it up? One of the most profound experiences of my life, I had the chance to meet Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who negotiated the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And he said something so powerful. He said, the most important human need is to be heard.
It's a great way to put it.
How can we listen to each other in a meaningful way, and then be there for each other and be reliable for each other?
That's what we're trying to do right here with Red Pill Sessions. Let's get into TLC Unpretty. We are talking mental health still with Dr. Tyler Norris. I'm DJ Ski. We'll be right back. Welcome to the inaugural Red Pill Sessions here. I'm DJ Ski, joined by Dr. Tyler Norris, courtesy of Providence St. Joseph Health. I hope you guys have enjoyed the show. I've learned a lot just kind of sitting from this side of the table. Tyler, thank you so much for your insight and everything that you're doing out there too. It's such a great cause. Now, we've been playing music from artists that we've talked about, everybody from Logic to TLC, who you just heard right there, to athletes. And another artist that brought up an interesting point that you guys did some content with is a friend of ours, is Demrick. And he's like, I grew up somewhere where it's not a major city. There's not a ton of resources available. But luckily, there's a technology that you guys have, that you guys are working with. And let's talk about Telesign.
Sure. Telepsychiatry is basically the use of remote technology, video conferencing, any one of the platforms, to be able to have someone in a remote location who just wants to be able to have the conversation from home. Maybe it's not easy for them to leave the household, or work or family realities, or just it's difficult to move, or it's a long ways away, like much of rural America, or there's no psychologist or psychiatrist, even if you could get in the car, or you might even be able to afford it. So telepsychiatry, essentially, it actually lends itself incredibly well to this kind of video conferencing, so that a clinician can talk remotely with someone from their own place about their anxiety, their depression, their substance use, be able to make referrals, talk about medication management, even even do cognitive behavioral therapy and other methods on the phone. And it works shockingly well. And it makes sure that there becomes much more universal access to psychiatry than would be if you just needed to come into the office and sit down at the doc's
It
office.
seems so cool and so much easier too than again going out, waiting in the lobby. Like I want to start using that now. Like I don't want to ever want to leave my house.
Waiting, and then
No matter where you are,
yeah.
we're in the middle of one of those populated
Right.
cities out here
Right.
now. From some of the things that you guys are working with too, is that let's talk about some of the grants and things out there.
So WellBeing Trust is about 10 months into being a new national foundation focused on mental, social, and spiritual health.
Incredible.
And so we're taking a sort of a systems approach, investing in policy change to make sure that state and federal policies putting the resources we need into making sure there's access to mental health and substance use services. We're expanding conversations through communications and social media to make sure we're normalizing having conversations about these issues. As we talked about before, we're grant making into youth organizations to build youth capacity to show up for each other. But we're also investing on the ground in everything from a crisis stabilization unit that's an alternative to an emergency department in a time of need, to partnerships in schools around trauma and adverse community experience, and how do we trauma-inform work. My meeting this morning was with a housing developer who's building affordable housing but wants to address mental health and see housing as a producer of health, not just a place to live. So our grant making into communities, into organizations, into national policy, into building out the research base is essentially not only to change the conversation in the country about what creates mental health and well-being, but to make sure that the dollars and the resources that we need are there. We know we're spending it now because it's showing up in the sick care system and it's showing up in the criminal justice system. So our whole goal is let's stop investing downstream when people's lives are already challenged and move that money up to prevention and making sure people have a good start from the beginning. Starting with T-minus 9 months, hey, I'm pregnant, how do I get the support I need to do right as a young mom?
Such an important topic. Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Norris. It's much appreciated from myself. I know from all the listeners and everybody out there. Such a great cause with what you're doing with the WellBeing Trust and, of course, Providence St. Joseph Health. Now, before we get out of here, we're almost out of time. We've played a lot of records, had a lot of great conversations, and we're going to have this recap video up on Ski TV for those of you listening to us on Dash Radio. Is there any other final words or anything else that you want to address?
Ski, first of all, thank you for this conversation. And the most important thing, again, I could say is that if you feel anxious, if you feel depressed, if you're struggling with substances, you're not alone. This is a normal human piece. And the courage looks like being able to name it, get some help, and then when you notice somebody else is show up for them, because what a friend means is somebody who's really there, not just in the fun times, but when somebody's really going through it. So we can be who we need to be for each other.
And unlike other issues where, certain people may get sick or do all those things, you might not know anybody that has a specific disease. Everybody out there listening has either been affected or knows somebody. So there's nobody that's alone in this. So it's, in theory, should be the easiest, even though it's probably the most taboo out of everything else. Yeah. Dr. Norris, thank you so much for your time and help. We hope you guys have enjoyed the inaugural Red Pill sessions right here. I'm DJ Ski, and hopefully you've learned something. We'll see you next time. And, of course, see the video right now on Ski TV.